Republican majority is taking steps to usurp local control, undermine the will of Gwinnett voters, and allow politicians from around the state to draw local maps for Gwinnett.
The Gwinnett County Democratic Legislative Delegation came out swinging today, claiming state Republicans are trying to reinstate, quote, white power in their county. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on this day 6 of the Georgia legislative session. Strong words from Gwinnett County Democratic representatives against Republicans. We will have more on that story coming up. Tomorrow, House Speaker David Ralston will announce major mental health reform measures during a press conference. Solving mental health issues is considered a priority this session for both Republicans and Democrats. Some consider mental health at a crisis level. Tonight, we have 4 lawmakers joining us from both parties who will talk about mental health concerns, including its effect on public safety and corrections. We'll talk about worries over suicide rates and substance abuse. But first, we head to the Gold Dome for a report on what happened there today with Capitol correspondent Brenda Waters. And Brenda, some explosive words from some Democrats.
Indeed, Donna. Even before the House and the Senate convened this morning, the Gwinnett County Legislative Delegation was holding a press conference with reporters. And Representative Sam Park did not mince words.
Clearly, white power is alive and well in the Georgia Republican Party.
The leadership team of the Gwinnett County delegation gave an update on House Bills 872 and 873, legislation that would revise the district boundaries for the Gwinnett County Board of Education and County Board of Commissioners.
Yesterday, Republican leadership, led by their Majority Caucus Chair, Bonnie Rich, took the unprecedented step to forcibly change Gwinnett's local redistricting map by sending them to another committee against my objection and against the objection of the majority of representatives whose districts represent Gwinnett County.
The delegation says they have information to back up what they are claiming, that Republicans are making steps toward local control, undermining the will of Gwinnett voters and allowing politicians from across the state to draw local maps for Gwinnett,
which demonstrates racially discriminatory intent and violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Representative Park had this final message for voters.
Now is the time to rise up, Georgia. To all who call Gwinnett home, we need you now. Stand with us. Rise up and demand that Republicans stop their obstruction and pass fair maps for Gwinnett. That's all we want.
Also today, Senate Majority Leader Mike Dugan and members of the Senate Majority Caucus held a press conference to outline their legislative priorities for this session. Top of the list, safety in our communities and on our streets.
I have introduced sweeping legislation in the Safe Communities Act of 2022, which will include increased penalties for inciting a riot or mob intimidation, vandalism of private businesses and government property, assaulting first responders, and obstructing highway during unlawful assemblies.
Also a priority, online security.
I will introduce legislation to protect Georgia users across all major social media platforms from the ongoing censorship that has unfairly targeted conservatives and anyone who seems to challenge the prevailing thought.
Critical race theory, or CRT, is a subject that stoked intense debate on both sides.
I sincerely believe that if my colleagues, regardless of political party, will read the language of my bill without having some preconceived notion or knee-jerk reaction based on the mention of CRT, they will agree with me. At its core, this bill will simply be an attempt to affirm core values that unite all Georgians and mirror how we should all view our fellow man.
And finally on their list of priorities, better opportunities for those willing to work hard for a better life.
I'll be introducing the Apprenticeship expansion legislation. It's going to be backed by $1.2 million in new funding in the state budget. And this legislation will direct the technical college system of Georgia to support the growth of apprenticeship programs and expand high-quality work-based learning experiences in high-demand fields and careers.
Yesterday, the proposed bill to amend the Georgia Constitution by banning non-citizens from voting failed to pass, falling short of the two-thirds majority needed to advance. Well, today, the Senate voted to reconsider that amendment, which means it will be put up for a vote again. And one picture-perfect start for the House today as House members began on a fun note. All the representatives were seated for the taking of the annual panoramic picture. It was a Kodak moment. Donna, back to you. That's my Capitol report.
Did you try to get in it?
I did.
Oh, all righty. Thanks,
out.
Brenda.
Get out.
All right. Thanks, Brenda. We're going to spend the rest of the show exploring the complicated issues involving mental health care in Georgia, beginning with the problems in public safety. And joining me to begin the discussion are Democratic Representative David Wilkerson of Powder Springs and Republican Representative Sharon Cooper of Marietta. And she is also chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee. So welcome to Lawmakers to both of you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with you. After talking about the National Alliance of Mental Health reports, about 2 in 5 adults in jail or prison have a mental illness. And so you have a bill, HB 678, and so tell us a little bit of what it does. Among other things, it brings the GBI into the process of investigating deaths in prison.
It does, and I'm glad to see that mental health is a focus this session, I think, on both sides of the aisle. The bill was sparked by a couple of deaths that happened in Cobb County jails, and it wasn't just Cobb County several years ago, it's all across the state. And so we started looking at, what happens when someone dies in jail? And the law is currently that the sheriff gets to investigate themselves. And no matter what kind of job they do, the public still perceives it as being biased. And so the bill would first require that any death in the jail is investigated by the GBI. I'm very glad to say that Cobb County is doing that on their own. They now bring in the GBI for any investigation into a death. And so at least you have that independent look and gives people a reassurance that if something unfortunate does happen, that at least somebody else is looking at it.
And the belief is that mental health issues are part of the problem?
It is. If you talk to law enforcement, and this is protecting the families of individuals that are there, as well as the law enforcement officers that work in the jails. A large majority of individuals that are in jail, or a large number, I should say, have mental health issues, and they're not diagnosed until they get into jail, and the jails are not equipped to deal with those issues. And so this bill kind of helps with that. And one piece that's also in the bill would require a 24-hour health facility for the prisons, for the prisoners, I guess, or the people in the jail. And so Cobb County, once again, has decided to institute that on their own. I think they're investing about $2 million in that. And so we would love to see that done statewide, but it's going to take money.
Yeah, I just realized both of you are from Cobb County, so there's a lot of good things going on with Cobb County.
There is.
Representative Cooper, let's talk about some movement today on a bill that you've been sponsoring, and that is the Psychiatric Advance Directive bill.
Right. I hate to say it, but that bill has been considered for 13 years. Wow. It took that long to get everybody on board, for the lawyers, for the psychiatrists, for the advocates, and now it has just numerous backers. Because a lot of work has been done on it. What it does, it gives the patient with mental illness, when they are not in crisis, a chance to say how they'd like to be treated when they are. And it allows them to appoint somebody to represent them when they are in mental crisis and can't make decisions for themselves. It doesn't keep the doctor or demand or require them to follow the advance directive, but it says how they'd like to be treated. And maybe they're bipolar and they had lithium and it didn't work well and they felt bad on it. Well, they could put that they would prefer not to have lithium as treatment. So, and it's an empowerment, here again, of having some control over your life and over your illness. So I'm really proud that it is now moving. It'll be going to rules next in the House.
What took it so long, do you think, 13 years?
advanced directives were sort of new. During that 13 years, that's when the first hospital advanced directives were on what you want if you are on hospice. It took us, I think those occurred during that 13 years. So it was sort of a new concept. And then for mental health and for mental illness, it was very new. And how would this affect the hospitals? Would it require the doctors to do something? And all the legalities on it. Would the hospital be responsible if they didn't follow the directive? So it's taken a while to work it out.
Well, it sounds like it's moving along. So we'll have to have you back to talk about that more. Now, I want to bring in someone else on this. Representative Sandra Scott. I spoke to her earlier. She's sponsoring a bill, HB 853, for mental health treatment alternatives. And when it comes to sentencing and punishment for prisons, and she says the law enforcement officers sometimes take people who suffer from mental illnesses to jail because they don't have anywhere else to take them. Listen.
They bring them to the jail because it takes about 2 days for them to get them evaluated to say that this person has mental health issues and that they need the care. And they say that's one way where they can keep the person safe for a little time, because a lot of times they even have to find something to charge them with, because not always they out committing crimes. They just have mental health issues and they can't get the help or the care that they need.
Yeah, I'd like you both to comment on that. You agree?
I do in a lot of ways. I think sometimes families don't know where to turn, and so they call the jails. And I don't know if they create issues as much as find something to keep that person where they are. So
yeah, we talked about this earlier. You've seen this happen too.
Well, yes, because basically it's a requirement. Yeah. Before the police can transport a mentally ill patient that doesn't, is not cooperative and wants to go on their own, and for them to take them to the emergency room, they have to charge them with a crime. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is the person's in a crisis, and when they get better, then they are faced with a civil penalty. So it's really not the way to do it. And we have moving also a bill called the Co-Responders Bill. And it'll be worked with our community mental health clinics across the state. And what it does is that somebody's in crisis and the police get a 911 call. The officer will go out with a mental health worker that works out of that CSB, or in the future, depending on how much they need the coverage, they might be on the phone or by Zoom with them as they go out, so that somebody that is trained in dealing with mental health crisis could help the officer in identifying that this person really is serious and help them know where to take that person, so without charging the person with a crime.
Yeah, it's interesting that occurs, and that there's both sides of it's a bipartisan support for doing something about that.
Oh, on mental health, yeah. I think this is one of the most bipartisan things.
Yeah, and it's taken time. I think the reality is that it's impacting people across the state. No matter what your economic status is, no matter what part of the state you live in, it's impacting you. So it's one of those things that, unfortunately, because we're at the crisis level, that you are seeing bipartisan support. So I'm glad to see it, because you've been doing this for years, and I'm sure you've had some tough conversations, and I'm glad to see it actually moving forward.
Yeah, I wonder, we've talked about staffing shortages across the state. I wonder, in terms of what you were talking about earlier with the prisons and the jails, if staffing shortages play a part in some of what we see happening. Oh, it may be negative. Yeah.
Definitely. And the problem is, not every county is wealthy enough to afford the staff. And so, how do you make that investment at the state level to make sure it gets to the law enforcement in the jails? And I think that's a discussion that we have to have of how you fund it. So.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we have are the federally qualified health centers across our state. There's 229 of them. And they have physicians and often have, an agreement with some of the jails, this is new, where they are delivering the health care. And they have mental health workers, and it's been very effective in the places where they, have contracted with the Sheriff's Department to look after the ones that are mentally ill and just generally ill. Their philosophy is not related to the jails, but they are trying to integrate with their doctors that do like family medicine, that they start early in identifying mental health problems of the people they see. and dealing with them when they first see them before they, escalate into real crisis. And I tell you, they are our safety net. These are the federally qualified health programs. And all over our state, they see patients without insurance. They see patients on a sliding scale. They are truly our safety net across our state. And they are doing a really good job in trying and integrating this mental health into all health care.
Yeah, I've got to, while you're here, I know that you've been doing a lot when it comes to the opioid crisis. Explain, where are we right now? What needs to happen?
Where we are young people and dying from 18 to about 45. It's the leading cause of death. And it's fentanyl. And every parent, every grandparent needs to talk to their grandchildren or their children. I got embarrassed the other day. I have a little boy that walks my dog, and I just learned of 2 deaths. And when Toby was getting ready to leave, I just gave him a whole lecture on it, and then had to call, not a lecture, but discussion about it. Had to call his mother on his way home and say, I hope you didn't mind, but I just had a discussion with Toby because the fentanyl coming into the country, illegal fentanyl, they just stopped by somebody coming across the border. And they said they had enough fentanyl, one person had enough fentanyl on them to kill about 7 million people. Wow. It just takes less than what you put on the head of a pin. I mean, just tiny bit. And they're putting it in everything. And the number of pills that come across, they look exactly like what you would get from the pharmacy. Exactly like that. And so when one young person says, oh, here, take this, it'll keep you awake while you're studying for your exams in college, they think they're getting a prescription medicine. And all it takes is one time taking a pill that is laced with fentanyl, and you're dead. And so that is our real problem right now, is the fentanyl. And our death rate, and it's rising and continuing to rise. Over 100,000 this past year, and I think it'll be much bigger. And fentanyl is a major, just taking drugs is a problem, but fentanyl is what's killing people.
Well, thank you so much for giving us information about it, making us aware of it. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it more during this legislative session. It'll be interesting to see what the Speaker has to say tomorrow at his press conference. Right. Thank you both for being here on Lawmakers. Coming up, we'll continue talking about mental health issues, talking about substance abuse and suicide rates. You're watching Lawmakers on GPB.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
GPB is free to all citizens of Georgia across 9 television stations, 18 radio stations, and innovative education and digital divisions. GPB Radio breaks down important issues happening statewide, bringing you unbiased news and information from Georgia journalists and NPR.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Wherever you are in Georgia, we're glad that you're listening.
Show your support by visiting gpb.org.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. We're going to continue our discussion on mental health issues. We'll spend some time looking at the troubling issues of suicide rates and more on substance abuse. Joining me are Republican Katie Dempsey of Rome, who is also chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Human Resources and on the board of the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, and Democratic Representative Shelley Hutchison of Snellville, and she's a licensed clinical social worker and the owner of the Social Empowerment Center. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being here. Tough topic, but something that we all need to talk about. And let's start with asking both of you what you see are the major issues. We talked about them a little in the last session, but I'll start with you, Representative Hutchinson. What would you like to hear either, Speaker Ralston talk about tomorrow? What do you think are the main issues when it comes to mental health in the state?
Well, of course, funding. That's the bottom line of it. We need to have more people covered by Medicaid specifically, because Medicaid will cover more of serious mental health diagnoses and their treatment. So more coverage. I think we can tighten up our policies and how we treat our providers, and we have some duplication in regulation that I think has to be addressed. But coverage and more funding is where we have to start.
And the funding deals with staffing too. What are you thinking? Yeah. What are you thinking that we need?
Over the last 11 years, that's when I began to chair this part of our appropriations in the House and work on it with so many people. We have added about $430 million into community services over those 11 years. So that's a lot of money. And it actually doubles what had happened the previous decade. So we have done much. The real challenge is that as Georgia grows, so do the problems grow. And our workforce right now is at a pretty crisis moment. It's challenging. There are some steps to help to increase the pay, I would say, in the governor's budget, which is a very good message. But the competition for the workforce to return is steep. It involves all sectors of the market, from fast food restaurants that can pay more than possibly someone who goes into a difficult situation, sometimes dangerous situation, with someone who is in crisis. So creating ways that are very creative to encourage and bring everyone in, from that very first person that is in contact with someone who needs mental crisis help or addiction crisis, to all the way to our psychiatrists and psychologists. It's a big, steep climb, but I believe we're about to begin that tomorrow.
Yeah, and then there's no easy answers.
There is
when you talk about staffing, you also talk about training, like people who know how to do this. And if you don't have them properly trained, that's a problem.
It is a problem. And unfortunately, being trained on a specific modality for mental health treatment is expensive. The better it is, the more it costs to be trained. So usually someone will go to school, get trained on one methodology, and they kind of stay there, because the average person coming out of school with a master's degree that signs up to do this job make under $50,000 a year. And with school loans and all the expenses that they have to make, it's expensive to have to go above and beyond and pay for extra training so that you can really keep up.
Yeah. I know that you have HB 239, and that deals with the Department of Behavioral Health and Disabilities and Audits. Talk a little bit about that.
So if you are a mental health provider in Georgia, you likely have contracts with Medicaid and all the Medicaid providers underneath. So we have Amerigroup and Centene, and we had WellCare. So all of these companies, we're doing the same thing, but they all audit individually. So if you have contracts with 10 people, that's 10 audits a year, sometimes more. So I believe if we can consolidate all of that, we can find extra money in the budget for mental health. The problem is just to pick out what they're doing with regulation has been really, really challenging. And I've been working with the research department for years.
Yeah, I hope that you have some movement on that, because it sounds like it's a major thing, and it sounds like a lot of red tape.
It is.
Chair Dempsey, I want to talk a little bit about another bill that you and Chairwoman Cooper have, and that deals with it deals with law enforcement taking people to ERs and to doctors rather than to jail. Talk about that and why that's important.
Well, it's just common sense, actually. Often, jail should not be the first step. There's a huge burden on law enforcement right now, and I think there's several measures out there that actually are going to take a look at it. One of them is this. One includes also taking a clinician with a peace officer to help make sure there's a proper diagnosis, understanding what the crisis really is, to help people get to the best place to not only de-escalate, but to receive the best treatment and to work toward being okay, to get better.
And if they do that now, you can't do that now, right? Law enforcement can't necessarily take them. So that's why this bill would help with that?
There's some exceptions.
Okay.
I think we're trying to tighten up the method, in essence.
So that makes all the sense in the world, as you said, talking about that. I know that you also are part of the bill that moved along that I talked to Chairwoman Cooper about, that is the advanced psychiatric advance directive. Tell us about why you think that's important.
Well, I think, like Chairman Cooper said, when you are not in a crisis, you can be a part of what your care might be. This not only deals with those who are dealing with addiction and mental health ups and downs, but it also is very important to Alzheimer's, to look ahead when you get that diagnosis, to make the plan, to decide what your care should be, rather than waiting and someone else making all those decisions. It's the same thing as a health directive. Actually, in everything we're doing, we're trying to bring mental health to the exact same status that your physical health is, because they are equally important.
And I think people are beginning to learn that. I want to switch gears a bit, because according to the AGC recently, they said at least 67 Georgians under the age of 18 have died of suicide as of November 2021, an increase of 55 in 2020. I know you're, as a licensed clinical social worker, you're out there. You have a bill that deals with this, HB 9. Talk a little bit about what you hope that might do.
HB 9 was
suicide intervention.
So suicide intervention, teenagers are always at risk, higher risk than anybody else. And that has to do with the medication in their bodies. With this, it would give more education to suicide. It would start the conversation, at least at home and in schools. And that's where we start. That's where we start. If you're feeling depressed or down, or the opposite, if you're too manic or too hyper, then this is what we do. But all of those things, when you start medicating children, particularly teenagers, puts them at a high risk of suicide. And that's what we're trying to prevent, of course.
It's a real crisis level, isn't it?
It is at a real crisis level. And with COVID and with everybody at home, particularly people with like a low level of depression before, and then you're stuck at home and you may not have people around you, or you may have too many people around you. And medication works in this whole picture. If you are depressed and you have any suicidal tendencies, and you get a new antidepressant, that might lift you up just high enough to complete the suicide. And that's pretty common. I had a parent at my kid's school. She had a history of depression. Nobody really knew. And she got a new medication. It lifted her up just enough so she can complete what she had been planning.
Wow. So it's a combination of all those things, because that can lead to the substance abuse, right? So in some cases where people are depressed, there's substance abuse, and then if that's not enough, then sometimes they take their lives.
Yes. So we're all working on coping mechanisms, and sometimes, unfortunately, substances are a coping mechanism. Substances, Sometimes coping is laying in bed. Sometimes it's binging on Netflix. You have healthy coping mechanisms and not so healthy. And unfortunately, the end result was suicide.
We talked about this for the entire show, and we're barely scratching the surface. Thanks so much for being here. We'll have to do more. Thank you for joining us for Lawmakers. Have a great evening.